If any martial arts happens in the next half hour, just know that something's gone terribly wrong. Or terribly right. I like this guy. All right, hi everyone. I am today just absurdly excited to meditate on the topic of naming things in software. And I've been wanting to give this talk for literally years, as my long-suffering friends will attest, so this is gonna be fun. Before we get to names in software, let's start with my name. Yes, I'm Ruthie, and I've spent over a decade writing software, rewriting software, sometimes even writing about rewriting software. And I want to do a quick show of hands. Who in the room is not an engineer? Excellent. Okay, so I think people are going to get a kick out of some of the examples that I'm going to share today, because they might be new to you. So let's get into it. If you work with or in or around software, it's possible that you have heard or read this truism at some point, which is that there are only two hard problems in computer science, and those two problems are cache invalidation and naming things. If you don't know what cache invalidation is, you're very lucky, and if you have feelings about cache invalidation, I will meet you at the bar later. The reason why I'm starting with this truism is because, well, it's true, but also because there's an amended version. And here's the amended version. And I'm sharing this, the scattered laughter tells me where the engineers are sitting. I'm sharing this amended version not just because it's a good joke, though it is. I'm sharing this amended version because its existence nicely illustrates this essential fact about modern software development, which is that much of what we make is an amendment to, or an extension of, or otherwise built atop or alongside something created by someone else. And that's true, right? Like, unless your company lawyers have told you to write a clean room implementation of something so you don't get sued, or maybe if you're doing like doctoral level research at like the very boundaries of human knowledge, like, unless you're in one of those two categories, mainstream software development these days, it's largely an exercise in making things with other people's code. And if we're always making things with other people's code, well, that implies that we're all going to be spending much of our working lives learning about and getting to know projects and products and tools that are brand new to us. And when a project or product or tool or library or method or API is new to me and I'm getting to know it, my very first task is to build up my mental model of it. I want to understand how it connects with what I already know, partially because curiosity, but also for a pretty real reason, which is that what I'm trying to do is determine if this new thing is going to be good enough at solving my problem to justify the space it's going to take up in my code base and my brain. And so that's something to keep in mind. And what's the very first piece of information that we have, that we get about new abstract constructs that we're getting to know? Its name. Its name is the sticky note on the side of the shoebox amongst the eternity of shoeboxes that comprises my brain's filing system. I don't know about yours. So names are pretty important. But sometimes, names don't give us enough of a clue, or any clue, which shoebox to put this thing into. And sometimes we make things that other people are trying to cram into their virtual toolkits and their mental shoeboxes. And if we don't name them well, you know what they're thinking? They're thinking, what even is this? And what do I do with this? And am I dumb? And I have no idea where this goes, and I'm not going to use this. So, as people who use software, and people who write software, and people who write about software, we ought to take care to name things well. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Names within software, why they matter, why sometimes they are not great, and what we can do to make them better. So first, why on earth is it so hard to name software? Well, let's start with a very cynical reason, which is that all the good names are already taken. And we've kept things pretty abstract until right now, so let's get specific for a bit. I want us to go through an exercise of creating some software together, just as a mental exercise. So I keep, whoa, all right, I'm not gonna do that again. I keep a daily to-do list on paper. It's actually spiral-bound paper, and it's like checked paper, which is nice because it makes it easier for me to draw literal check boxes, which I can then check off, which makes me feel happy and productive, even when the words next to the checkbox say, like, brush your teeth. We've all been there, don't judge. Let's say I'm getting sick of carrying this thing around because it doesn't quite fit in my pocket, but, there we go. But I carry this around too, and how hard could it possibly be to reproduce the functionality of this paper over here and that experience in code? Famous last words. So I'm creating this app, right? This to-do app. And the first thing I'm going to do is set up my Git repository. And by the way, GitHub recognizes that naming is hard, and it tries to help in this really adorable way. But I don't think that Improved Disco is a good name, probably, for my to-do app, though it is a great band name. And so what I'm going to try and do is come up with maybe a better, more appropriate name for this to-do app. And because it's my first pass and I'm going to just kind of be boring and descriptive about it, I'm going to say, let's call it to-do lists. Boring but serviceable. Let me just check to make sure there isn't already something out there with that name. Crap. Not only is there something out there with exactly that name, there's also something out there for every other name that I can come up with. And if I were a marketer or a brand strategist, this right now would meander off into a discussion about naming products, and there's definitely a lot of interesting things to talk about there, but we've only got half an hour, so rather than talk about bad names for software, I'm going to try and refocus us onto talking about bad names within software. And it turns out that naming within software actually has the exact same problem as naming of software. But rather than refer to this problem with the same words like normal people, we engineers instead like to be clever and use the term overloading, which does actually have a specific meaning in computer science. It has to do with like a function that has the same name that if you call it with different things, does different things, which that's not confusing at all. And it's also just totally unnecessary here. So let's just move on into a couple of real-world examples of this same problem. So, first one, this is a true story. All of these are true things that I have encountered. So, I have a friend who works at a company that is trying to make it easier for people to plan and hold events. Like, they're trying to compete with Meetup and Facebook events and Eventbrite all at the same time, so good luck to them. And they found that calling an event felt too heavy to their users. Like, it was too much of a commitment. They wanted to keep it light. And so they decided to call events invites. So you get invited to an invite. Wait, it gets better. In the code, there's a function that sends emails out letting people who have been invited know that they've been invited. Those emails are also called invites. So to recap, there's a method that sends invites to people who have been invited to an invite. So here's another example, and this is actually from my day-to-day. So I work on a code base that uses a framework called React and another one called Redux, and the only thing that you need to know is that there's this core concept called a container in Redux. It's a way of organizing your application. Doesn't matter. All you need to know is that containers are a thing in Redux. And the company I work for makes software for waste haulers. Like people, okay, so people who like empty dumpsters for a living. And the waste hauling industry, I learned recently, really hates the word dumpster. The word dumpster to someone in the waste hauling industry is like going up to someone who works in tech and asking them unironically about the Googles. Like it immediately marks you as like someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. It grates. And so you know what they call those things that we all call dumpsters? They call them containers. So this is actual code, right? So all of the things circled in green are talking about the things with trash in them. The thing circled in blue is this abstract construct that only exists in Redux land. And this was totally not confusing for my first 2 months on the job. The best part, by the way, about this is that the way that I run this entire code base on my laptop is inside of a Docker, wait for it, container. There we go. So let's move on to another reason why naming software is hard. Descriptive naming is hard because it's reductive, and we're bad at choosing what to leave out. It's not possible to convey the totality of meaning and implication of an abstract construct in a single word, and yet that's what we're doing every single time we create a new variable or a new class or a new API method. And I'm going to repeat this because I don't think the Java runtime environment heard me. It is not possible to convey the totality of meaning and implication of an abstract construct in a single word. So please stop trying. And we'll get into what makes a good name later, but I think a good rule of thumb is doesn't line wrap twice. Okay, so another reason why naming software is hard. The name you give something, it's going to evoke unknown things for your reader. You don't even know who your reader is. It's going to evoke all kinds of stuff for them. And as an industry, we're pretty horrifyingly bad at anticipating the kinds of things that the names we choose will evoke. We get this sort of weird collective tunnel vision and fail to appreciate that others may have different contexts. So the following examples range from questionable to appalling. And with apologies to one of tomorrow's speakers, CockroachDB is actually not necessarily a bad name. It's actually a good name in one sense, in that the name cockroach evokes survivability, and that's the survivability of your data is like their core value proposition as I understand it. So arguably, like, kind of not a bad name. But I ask you, would you be likely to consider using this product if you have ever had to deal with a roach infestation? How excited would you be about using this product daily if you were currently dealing with a roach infestation? So I'll leave that as a question. And let's go back to names within software. So there's this model of communication, this is still in database land, there's this model of communication where one process has one-way control over other processes. And this is used in database replication quite a bit, where there's like one authoritative database instance and then some replicas. Basically, it's kind of like a backup strategy. And the people who are smiling already know where this is going, because do you know what this architecture is usually called? So that's definitely not going to evoke anything than what was intended. There's nothing problematic about that at all. Completely neutral terminology. So that's sort of the go-to example. There's another one that I learned pretty recently, in case you haven't had enough like accidental racism for one day. So here's another one. Think about what a blacklist connotes. Just think about like what sort of emotions that brings to mind, and then tell me that this is neutral. So a cool thing that I learned about this one actually is that a number of organizations, including I think the W3C or some other like big standards body, has actually started replacing its use of each of those terms with allow list and block list, which is more precise and less accidentally racist. So that's pretty cool. And then there's this one, which I will just let speak for itself. So I'm gonna broadly stereotype for just a moment, if you'll permit me, and that is to say that people who write software and who write about software care about precision. We're big into technically correct. And the problem with things that are technically correct is that sometimes they are not the most emotionally intelligent choice. All right. Another reason why naming software is hard. I'm running out of reasons. That's not true. There's infinite reasons. Okay, so another reason why naming software is hard. The first time we make something, or the first time we write about making something, we're making our best guess as to what the appropriate name for that thing is. And sometimes we guess wrong. When you're naming a thing, you're trying to distill it to its essence, and maybe we don't know what its essence is yet. So in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, just stay with me for a second. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a whale materializes several miles above the surface of an alien planet. And since this is not a naturally tenable position for a whale, it had to come to terms with its existence in very little time, and it did so by naming things. And even in that brief window of time, this whale recognized that with perhaps more optimism than was warranted, that there would be time to come up with better names later. And at the beginning of a project, honestly, sometimes I feel a bit like this whale. So naming is guesswork. And that to-do app that we were sort of playing with as a mental exercise, when I was first thinking about it, I thought that I would just need notions of like task and paper. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, wait, a recurring task is going to be different than just like a one-off task, because a one-off task, you check it off and it's done. It's gone forever. But a recurring task, if I check it off, do I want it to like disappear? No, because what if my recurring task is brush my teeth? Like, that's not going to end well. And it turns out that I don't actually need a notion of paper at all because it's a phone. So now there's like all this cognitive cruft in my code, and if I've written docs for this thing already in my docs, so that's not good because now my docs are wrong. And so yeah, I'm repeating myself, but the fact is that naming is guesswork. I'm surprised that people are laughing because this is actually not a joke. And this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's worth saying that the fact that naming is guesswork is why we can never avoid incurring technical debt. It's why we can never avoid the need for refactoring. We discover what our software is meant to do as we write it. And it's not until we've written it that we're able to judge whether we've written it right. And there's a reason why making it right is the second and not the first part of this philosophy. And this philosophy, by the way, guides how the Unix operating system is developed. And if you're working on a Mac or on any Unix-based system, this is the underlying philosophy behind the software that you use every day. So at this point, a reasonable person might say, look, all of this naming stuff seems to take a lot of like brain effort, and we haven't written a single line of code of that to-do app. Maybe it doesn't matter what names we use within our software, because it's not like end users will ever see that stuff anyway, right? It's a variable name. End users will never see it. So honest to God, I took this photo in the San Francisco airport on Saturday flying here. And this is a best case scenario, right? Like, at least they used a reasonable variable name. How bad would this have been if they'd called their internal variable name, which no one's ever going to see, "My boss is a jerk"? So, those are some reasons, though not an exhaustive list, of why it's hard to name software. And so, it's not surprising that we get it wrong sometimes. But also, like, we're not carving stone tablets here. It's software. We've all got delete keys. Why do bad names seem to persist? Well, maybe we don't realize the name is bad. Let's talk about what this looks like most often. It can look like an empathy failure. The problems caused by this name don't affect me, therefore those problems don't exist. We all know this person. It can look like a beginner's mind failure. Like, this is perfectly clear to me, the person who wrote this software, and I don't remember what it was like to not understand this. Or it can look like a localization failure. Seriously, look this up. I would say Bing it, but maybe you should Google it. Or maybe we recognize, that's if we don't recognize that the name is bad. Maybe we do recognize that the name is bad, but we can't or won't justify fixing it. So this is probably familiar territory for all documentarians in the room, because often your job is to explain something that, had it been named better, wouldn't have required an explanation in the first place. So what can this look like? It can look like a failure of over-attachment, maybe for sentimental reasons, to a name that is no longer fit for purpose. And this is a failure mode that's experienced by company founders a lot. You'll see this a fair bit. It can look like a simple knee-jerk hatred of change, because we are humans and we do not like change. It can take the form of us overestimating the cost of changing a name, because charitably, we're nervous, or we don't trust our own ability to estimate how long the renaming will take, or we've been burned before on bad estimates, or uncharitably, we're trying to weasel out of doing some work. It can also take the form of underestimating the value that the improved name will generate. So this is projection, which means that on some level it's guesswork, and if you have a stakeholder who doesn't, believe that this name change is going to result in significant ROI, then it's not going to happen, and you're not going to have the agency that you need in order to make the change. So that's why we live with bad names. We either don't recognize that they're bad, or we recognize that they're bad, but we lack the will or the ability or the agency to change them. We spent a lot of time talking about good and bad names, and so I figured now's probably a good moment to actually talk about what makes a name good or bad. And we think about this both when we're writing software, and we also think about this when we're documenting software. And the truth is that I struggle with how to answer this, because naming is a balancing act. A name shouldn't be too long, but it also shouldn't be too short. It should adhere to your style guide, except for when doing so would be confusing. It should avoid ambiguity unless the ambiguity is necessary. It should be easy to pronounce unless that doesn't matter for your use case. It should be memorable, but not for the wrong reasons. It's a balancing act. And it's also a judgment call. And judgment calls are hard to abstract or automate away. And so the best that I can do is share some heuristics for assessing whether a name is good or bad in the context of being understood by the humans working with it. Because good or bad is only meaningful in the context of humans using what we make and learning from what we write. So bad names confuse, they frustrate, they misguide, they obscure, they offend. Good names make aha moments happen, often by connecting or analogizing a virtual interface or concept with a tangible one in a way that correctly sets expectations about what the thing does, what it's responsible for, how it might respond to a user's interaction with it. Good names contextualize, they explain, they illuminate, they empower. They don't break my brain's shoebox filing system. And it would definitely be useful to have some sort of rigorous mental framework for assessing a name's quality, something that's not squishy in any way. And I'd really like to have one, because that would mean that I would be able to think less about variable names and think more about what's for dinner. But ultimately, I think that's a fool's errand. No two people's frameworks are ever going to exactly match. No two people are going to use the exact same heuristics, evaluated in exactly the same way. And those two people, by the way, might include present me and me 6 months from now as I learn and grow. So that brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about together, which is how can we name software better? And I can tell you that it would be great if technology could solve this problem for us. But there is a reason why there is no Fix My Broken Names app, and I checked. So technology can help us with the mechanics of naming things well. For example, we can do a search for similarly named things to see if there's something that already exists in our code base. We have automated linters and automated style guide enforcers that can, say, prevent a variable from being too long or being capitalized incorrectly or inconsistently. And the tools that we use to document software are actually pretty good at exposing, say, inconsistencies in API variable names. And all of that is valuable, to be sure. But it doesn't help us much with the hard part of naming, which is the part that requires our judgment. That's on us. And so we who write software, and we who write about software, and we who use software have a superpower, which is that our judgment about names is pretty finely honed. We're pretty excellent at recognizing when names in software leave room for improvement. So, coming back to our to-do list, here's today's to-do list and every day's to-do list. For documentarians, you have really good judgment about this stuff. Let developers know when their names miss the mark. For developers, writing software is an exercise in naming things. Embrace it. And for everyone in the room, when you encounter a name that doesn't sit right with you, take a deep breath and remember that poorly named API method or that nonsensical function signature is not here to spite you. Remember that software is made not by jerks on the internet, but by humans like you and me, doing the hard work of giving form and name to shiny new things that enable us to build the stuff of our dreams. And I'm on the social network of your choice as @Unruthless, and you should definitely @mention me with any other names that you'd like to deconstruct. Thank you.